everybody. Um, Welcome to Spooky Things. Kind of caught me there. Um, I hope everybody's had a great week. I've had a pretty good week so far. Oop, there we are. Um, yeah, it's been an interesting week. Um, Tonight we're going to be talking about things that happen up in the air. There's a lot of things that we're not privy to, and basically we're just told whatever they want to tell about things that happen up in the skies. I'm talking about public as well as private airplanes. It's really a pretty well guarded thing that goes on up there, and I just kind of wanted to get into a little bit of that tonight. Um, in particular, a couple of the airplanes that have a I have a bad echo. Hang on just a minute, guys. Is that any difference at all, Stan?
No.
No?
No.
How about now? How about now?
It's the same.
How about now?
It's a little lower.
Yeah, because that's all I'm basically doing. Um, okay. How
Can you
about
do it on your phone?
uh not really. Is that a little bit better?
Not really.
I don't understand what's going on.
It's like you have a double talk.
Okay. But it wasn't doing it while we were just talking.
Not till you entered the studio.
Huh. Okay, let's try it again. How about now?
No, it's the same.
It's the same? Okay. How about now? Is it better?
No. Do you have the computer speakers on?
Okay, how about now? Can you hear it now? Okay, you can hear me now? Does it sound okay? Is it at the right level? Okay. Was any of that able to have been heard? Okay. Let's try that again. My goodness. Okay. So we're going to go through this a little bit quicker here, okay? What I'm talking about is the Eastern Airlines Flight 401, and that was going from New York at the JFK airport, and it was going to the Miami airport. Um, this occurred on December the 29th, 1972. It's right after Christmas time. People are going home for their Christmas holidays. It's just sad when you think about it. It was widely studied in aviation history, not just for the tragedy itself, but because it fundamentally changed how flight crews are trained. So, this particular incident left a lasting mark on the Eastern Airlines protocols of how they handle training for their flight crew, mostly in for their flight crew. Um, it also had a high death toll attached to it. So this was something that was far from minor. It was a major occurrence. And there's a lot of things that occurred with this, but a lot of things made this in particular a very a very interesting situation that occurred here. The crash is also famous for a unique paranormal legend that followed in its wake, known as the ghost of Flight 401. And what makes this also interesting is that it is collaborated with a lot of different people and very precise sightings and people that were well respected. Like some of the flight crew wasn't aware of what was going on, and they reported things that were going on their flight, not knowing the connection between the two, but we'll get into that. So this is what makes this so tragic, is how this actually occurred, which a lot of people aren't really aware of. As the plane was approaching Miami, made the trip fine, and it was no incident on the plane whatsoever, the whole flight. The plane's approaching Miami. And it was just before midnight, so it's dark outside. Okay. The crew lowered the landing gear. They're preparing to land. The green indicator light for the nose gear did not come on. The pilots were unsure if the gear was actually unsafe or if the light bulb was just simply burned out. That's the tragedy of this right here. This is the turning point on the whole thing right there. The captain put the plane into a holding pattern over the dark Florida Everglades at 2,000 foot. The entire cockpit crew, which was Captain Robert Loft, First Officer Albert Stockstill, and the flight engineer Donald Repo, they became fixated on checking this tiny little light bulb and its connection with the landing gear mechanism. So all three of them are totally engrossed in why this light isn't on. Totally engrossed in it. Because if it's not on, that means that the landing gear is probably not locked into place. And as soon as they land, that landing gear is going to fold up, and that could occur. So this is where the whole thing changes, is that little light right there. So while the crew was distracted from that light, the autopilot somehow inadvertently got disconnected or switched to a mode where it would not hold altitude. The plane entered a gradual, unnoticed descent. How avoidable is this? Because it was a pitch black night over a swamp, there were no visual references on the ground. The plane flew gently and right into the Everglades, disintegrating on impact over a light bulb. I mean, this is what makes it all just so tragic. This is the result. On board that plane was 176 people on board that plane. 101 people died that night. The entire cockpit crew got killed. 75 people survived, which is amazing to me that even that many survived. I, living in Miami for most of my life, I basically, once we got from the States over to here, my dad retired, we lived in Miami. And being from a Floridian family, we made that our home area until we moved back up into North Florida. So for 33 years, Miami was our home. I know the Everglades. I know the Everglades very well. And I can tell you right now, being out in the Everglades at night is a scary thing. I mean, snakes are everywhere. Crocodiles are everywhere. We're really mostly more alligators than the crocodile. Crocodiles are really more up in the canal areas, but I mean, they're still there too. But really, they're more up around in the warming canals. That's where they hang out at a lot. But still, alligators are huge. The Everglades is not a place you want to be at night. That's for sure. And you sure don't want to be out there with an injury. So, 75 people to survive something like that to me is really a high number considering where they were, how they crashed. That to me in itself is a minor miracle. The swamp mud absorbed much of the impact, but the remoteness of the crash site made it extremely difficult for rescue. Now, this is the legacy that left behind, that entire situation. The National Transportation Safety Board, which is the NTSB, investigation revealed that the nose gear the whole time was actually down and locked. The only thing wrong with that plane that night was a light bulb that at that time cost 12 cents. 12 cents. 12-cent light bulb cost 101 people their lives and scarred the rest of them for the rest of theirs. That's tragic. The crash was attributed to pilot error, specifically the crew's failure to monitor the flight instruments. This accident is credited with the birth of crew resource management. CRM. And that's what became out of this whole incident and the retraining of the flight crew. Before Flight 401, captains were absolute authorities, and junior officers were hesitant to speak up. After Flight 401, airlines trained crews to work as a team, ensuring that one person is always flying the plane while others troubleshoot problems. Because there's three of them sitting there looking at a burned out 12-cent light bulb, and nobody is watching the plane heading straight down into the swamp. Really? I mean, don't you gotta kind of gotta sit back and think about that? And it's like, wouldn't common sense take over? It's like, is anybody flying the plane? Yeah. You're gonna wait till you hit the ground till you figure out that no. I don't know. So many years later, I guess it's so easy to sit back and look at it and go, seriously? But I'm not a pilot, man. Never flown one of those things. So I guess it's easy for me to sit there and, on this end of it. When you're actually going through the motions of it, it's not quite that easy. But it still leaves a lot to really. Now, here we're going to go into the ghosts of Flight 401. A bizarre legend emerged after the crash, popularized by John G. Fuller's 1976 book, The Ghosts of Flight 401. The legend is Eastern Airlines reportedly salvaged working parts like ovens and avionics from the crashed L-1011 and installed them on other aircraft in their fleet. Crews on these other planes began reporting sightings of Captain Bob Loft and flight engineer Don Repo. The ghosts were allegedly seen sitting in passenger seats or appearing in the galley, often warning the crew about electrical problems or potential safety issues. Because they did such a great job of that. That's terrible, but I mean, really, it's like, you know, you, you guys weren't so good at it either. The outcome is that the stories became so prevalent that the Eastern Airlines eventually removed the salvage parts from the fleet to stop the rumors. So the airline officially denied the hauntings. You know, that's a tough spot. It really is. I mean, economically speaking, if there's something that's usable and salvageable, one would think that business wise, you'd use it because anything coming from an aircraft, anything is a lot of money. There's a lot of money in those things. So if it's salvageable and there's nothing wrong with it, I can see why they would use it again. I mean, they're not going to go around telling everybody, oh, that came up, obviously. But that's where it kind of took a turn, though, too. Um, this is where big corporations lack because they take the human feelings out and they just go by corporate right doings. They go by what's best for the company. They don't. Human emotion does not become involved in that. It's like, I don't care where it came out of. If we can use it, we're going to use it. And that's that's kind of like where this came in from. So, what we'll do is that we're going to touch on two different things here. We're going to touch on the vital safety changes that saved lives today still as a result of this whole thing. And we're also going to go into some of the accounts stemming from Flight 401 to this very day. So the safety legacy is the crew resource management. Before Flight 401, the culture in the cockpit was hierarchical and extremely rigid. The captain was God, and the junior pilots often hesitated to correct or interrupt them, even if they saw a mistake. Flight 401 changed that forever by introducing CRM. So, you know, we're going to go into how the CRM training works today. And it's largely because of the lessons that were learned from that particular crash that night and how 101 people died for absolutely no reason because of a 12-cent light bulb. The, the is somebody flying the plane? Somebody's got to fly the plane. It's the golden rule of modern aviation. If a problem arises like a burnt out bulb, one pilot is designated to only fly the aircraft while the others can troubleshoot. On Flight 401, all three of the crew members were heads down fixing a light bulb, and no one was watching the altitude. Granted, they thought that the plane was on autopilot, so they thought that they were covered. But how many times are you sure that you put something on or it's fixed and you're fine? And luckily you checked it and it wasn't fine at all. And you're like, oh man. And you go and you check it. These guys never even bothered to look up to check. And it led to their own deaths as well. Nobody looked up to check. Situational awareness. Crews are trained to avoid tunnel vision. Flight 401's crew suffered from fixation. They were so focused on a minor mechanical issue that they lost track of the big picture where the plane was relative to the ground. This is why they flattened that, pilots are God kind of a thing. And junior pilots today are now trained to be assertive. Don't be afraid. If you see it, say it. If a first officer sees a captain making a dangerous error, they are required to speak up using a specific challenge language. For example, Captain, I am concerned about our altitude. Bringing it to the attention. It's just, I see it, I say it. Communication skills. It's not just about technical skills anymore. Pilots are graded on how well they talk to each other, share information, and listen to the rest of the crew, including the flight attendants. Let's face facts. The flight attendants back there, they know what's going on in the back of that plane. And a whole lot of times, what's going on in the back of that plane can really affect what's going on in that cockpit. And so the pilots and the crew are trained. Listen to what they have to say back there. It affects everybody. You're in a tin cylinder zipping through the sky that could not end well. You got to know what's going on front and back. So, off of the paranormal, off of that altogether, we're talking about what happened, how it happened, and how can we keep that from happening again. And in this particular case, it's really very simple. Somebody fly the flippin' plane. Not everybody get down there and look at one thing. Whereas in today's world, that is not going to happen because one person, they are going to do nothing but make sure that the plane is flying. And it just seems like such a simple answer. But yeah, aviation at that has taken so many different changes and, learn as you go. And learn they did. So that aside, now let's go into what has occurred since that incident has happened in the paranormal community. So it's called the legend of the flight of the ghost of the flight of 401. The paranormal aspect of the crash is unique because the ghosts weren't just haunting the site, they were allegedly working. The legend claims that after the crash, Eastern Airlines salvaged undamaged galley equipment like the ovens, the food lifts, and avionic components from the wreckage and installed them into other L-1011s in their fleet, specifically planes 318 and 302. Those two planes got the majority of the parts from Flight 401. This is the most reported of all of the sightings. It's called the face in the oven. On one flight, a flight attendant went to check the food in a galley oven. She reportedly saw the face of flight engineer Don Repo looking back at her from the oven door's reflection. She called another flight attendant and they both saw it. The vanishing captain. On another flight, a captain and two flight attendants saw a man in an Eastern Airlines uniform sitting in first class. When the captain spoke to him, the man just disappeared right in front of their eyes. They identified him from photos as Captain Bob Loft. The warning. In perhaps the most famous story, a flight engineer on a different plane was doing his pre-flight checks. He claimed he saw Don Repo sitting at the engineer's panel. The operation had reportedly said, "You don't need to worry about the pre-flight. I've already done it." And then he warned, there will never be another crash on another L-1011. We won't let that happen. And the sad part about that is even in death, it's like they still blame themselves. And that's terrible in itself. It's like they cannot they cannot rest with it. They know they know what they did was wrong. They know that they were the reason why that plane let. And it's like to infinity. They are just they won't let that ever happen again. And I don't know. I just find that so sad. As they weren't bad people and they were doing their best to do what they, were trying to fix it. But it tragically ended the opposite way. So the outcome of this entire thing was that the rumors became such a distraction and a morale issue that Eastern Airlines reportedly removed all salvaged parts from the fleet altogether. After the parts were removed, the sightings stopped. So, both of these legacies, the strict safety protocols and the paranormal events, make Flight 401 one of the most fascinating events in aviation history. And, as I said, the results of our actions, a lot of times, don't just stop with that one particular incident. You don't know how that ripple effect will affect it. And in this particular case, the ripple effect lasted a long time. Now, actually, for some good as well, because they're right. I mean, the way that it had all worked out is that because of what occurred that night, they now have protocol to where they're right that that will probably not ever happen again because they know. I mean, everybody knows how that one ended up. So this is interesting that I did come across, and that is they have here. It's a code. It's an assertive communication, and this is part of the training that they go through. This is a code that pilots use to keep each other sharp, and it's called the SAFE code, assertive communication. It's a 5-step assertive statement to ensure a junior pilot can override a senior captain without causing a confrontation. So it's not just encouraging talk, it's encouraging, it's providing you with the tools to do that with. Um, so if a co-pilot feels the plane is in danger, this is the script. There's an actual script that they have to follow. And what they do is that they use the pilot's name, Captain so and so, Captain Harry, Captain, whatever. Then you state your concern, Captain Harry. Use I statements to take ownership. So, I am concerned about our descent rate. So, Captain Smith, I am concerned about our descent rate. Um, and then when you state that you're concerned about it, you state, we are 500 feet below our assigned altitude. So you're giving him the information. This is what's happening. At that point, you offer a solution. You immediately give the fix to it. So you say, I think we should climb back up to 2,000 feet immediately. And if you really then you have to force a verbal response from the pilot. Do you agree? There is also a key phrase that many airlines use. I am uncomfortable. When a crew member says these specific words, I am uncomfortable, it's a red flag that stops all other conversation and forces the crew to reevaluate the situation. So I think if you're on a flight and you hear somebody say, I am uncomfortable, pray. Oh, oh boy. So, but that is a script. That is the actual script from Eastern Airlines that has to take place. If you see it, you say it. And that is the way how you say it. And that requires a response from the pilot to the person who is talking to him about being uncomfortable and how to do that fix, do you agree? And I think that's more than appropriate. I mean, and really more than appropriate. Um, there. What time is it? 46. There's one other plane. It's called the Ghost plane. It's the Helios Flight 522. Now, kind of, kind of like on the same level, kind of. Um, if the ghosts of Flight 401 were protective spirits, Helios Airways Flight 522, and this happened in 2005, is the dark opposite, a literal ghost plane. Shortly after takeoff from Cyprus, a small error by a ground technician leaving the pressure system on manual caused the plane to lose oxygen as it climbed. The entire crew and all 115 passengers suffered from hypoxia, which is oxygen deprivation, and fell unconscious. The plane, however, stayed right on autopilot. For over an hour, that ghost plane flew silently through Greek airspace. Two F-16 fighter jets were scrambled to investigate it. The fighter pilots looked into the windows and saw everyone slumped over, motionless. Suddenly, the F-16 pilot saw a lone figure enter the cockpit. A flight attendant by the name of, you guys know how I am with the name, it's Andreas Prodromou, Prodromou, who had managed to stay conscious using a portable oxygen tank. He needed to he tried desperately to save the plane, but both engines flamed out from fuel exhaustion just as he took the controls. The plane crashed into the hills outside of Athens. So, again, this is totally avoidable. This was totally avoidable. And, it's just a ground technician leaving a pressure system on manual. Kind of makes you can't wait to fly again, doesn't it? I mean, so let's compare the two. Okay, so Flight 401 was the teamwork lesson. In Helios 522, it was the checklist lesson. The primary cause of Flight 401 was distraction and lack of monitoring. On Flight 522, it was improper pre-flight switch setting. Both such minor things that cause these horrible impacts. The key outcome, Flight 401, was the birth of crew resource management. In 522, it was stricter pressurization checklists. So, the atmosphere around 401 was an active cockpit, but focused on the wrong thing. And in Flight 522, it was a silent, pressurized tomb flying on autopilot. Both caused by a minor, insignificant event that was easily remedied and didn't occur. because the attention wasn't put where it should have been. Human error in both. And it was just so sad because such a minor thing that happened caused so many people to lose their lives. And it's just so, there's others. And, people talk about paranormal happenings and, things that we don't understand. Sometimes you have to kind of sit back and think it's even scarier when you realize what really happened, you know? And if there's things that go bump in the night, sometimes it's like it's happening right in front of you and you don't even know what's happening. And something so minor can cause such grief and pain and sorrow. And with just a little bit of attention to detail, could have been avoided altogether. So sometimes, when you talk about spooky things, that's pretty spooky. And when you get down to it, something so simple and it turns into so tragic. But and I know it makes you pause and think, I can't just go through life just pushing things off because obviously I'm not a pilot and I'm not responsible for hundreds of people's lives. But really, what I do for a living is that I do operate a vehicle and I do have other people's lives at my in my concern. And hearing about something like this, we have checklists that we have to go through as well. And I go through them because just that one thing that I could miss could cost somebody else or myself, whoever, their life. So that's a spooky thing. That's a spooky thing for sure. So that is Flight 401. One of the things that also makes this very, very, very real is that the flight engineer, Mr. Repo, Cap, yeah, the flight engineer, Mr. Repo, he liked hanging out. It's actually kind of cute. Don Repo, flight engineer Don Repo, while during the flight, he used to like going back and talking to the attendants, the flight attendants back there. And he just had this thing about grabbing an apron and putting it over himself, hanging out in the back with them. And it was just kind of like a humorous thing that he did. And the people that worked with him knew it well. But yeah, I mean, nobody else had paid any attention to it. The interesting thing is that when they saw the apparition of flight engineer Repo, he was wearing the apron, and they described him as wearing the apron, and they had no idea. And as soon as they said that, they were like, nobody else really knew that. Only the people who worked with him knew that he would go back and hang out with the attendants, when the plane was stable and they were flying, and and so he would get up and go out and hang out with the attendants and talk to them and help them, but he always put an apron on. It was just a humorous thing that he did. So that made it very telling. This person had no idea who this gentleman actually even was. And and then there was another flight attendant who, of course, did not know Mr. Repo. And she saw his face in the oven door. And She didn't really say a whole lot. She thought, well, maybe it was just her, you know, imagining something. But then she turned around and saw him, and she didn't know who he was. And she went back and she explained, I just saw somebody in uniform, but it was just odd because he had an apron on. And they said, we know who that is. But there were pilots that saw it. There were people who had no reason to lie. They saw it. So this is real. These came from highly educated people, from very, very reputable people who had seen this. And this is what happened for quite a while. So, anyway, when I talk about a think tank, here's a think tank for you. Think about those little things that you do and how that ripple effect can go out there and go far beyond where you are and really just take on a completely different life all to itself. It just kind of makes you sit back and wonder, I got to be a little bit more careful about what I'm doing, especially when it involves the lives of other people. Really got to be careful out there. So, anyway, that's the story of Flight 401. And I'm hoping that you found it interesting. And it is time for us to end another session of Spooky Things with Debbie. Um, One thing I did want to remind as well, like I do every night after I ending my shows, the Deep South Paracomic-Con is coming up, and it's going to be on August the 8th and the 9th. Um, we have wonderful, wonderful people who are going to be there again. Brett Wagner, Lee Triana, Terry Brown. It's going to be at the Enterprise Civic Center in Enterprise, Alabama, um, Saturday and Sunday. And Keith Age is going to be there. Oh gosh, we've got a great lineup. Always have a great lineup for you guys. So we'd love to see you there. And the Enterprise Civic Center is absolutely gorgeous. Really, very, very nice. So we're excited. It's going to be our first year at the Enterprise Civic Center. So we're all excited about it. So, everybody, I hope that you have a great week. And just remember, think about those little things out there. You might find it comes in pretty handy. You all take care, and we'll see you next week at 7 o'clock Central Time. Oh, no Brett Wagner this time? Oh, okay. So it's still going to be Lee Triana, Terry Brown, and Keith Age. Um, and I know that they're working on a few other people too that are like, wow, that's going to be cool. So in any case, we'll see you next Tuesday at 7 o'clock. And we'll see what we come up with then. You guys have a great week. We'll see you next Tuesday. Bye bye.